You clicked to see her severed head on a pike. But what if I told you she wasn't just executed? They tore her limb from limb. They made her scream in ways history refused to write down. And what they did next was meant to break the queen herself. Paris, 1792. The streets reeked of blood, piss and smoke. The old world was crumbling beneath the boots of revolutionaries, and no crown, no title, no amount of powdered silk could hold back the tide. The guillotine worked overtime in the Place de la Révolution, and inside the walls of the Tuileries Palace, Marie Antoinette clutched her children and waited for the next name to be called. But Marie-Thérèse de Lamballe had already made her decision. She could have fled. Others did. She had coin, connections, ships waiting at the port. But Lamballe stayed, not out of ignorance, not out of vanity, but for loyalty. The queen's closest confidant, her shadow in salons and gardens, her shield against a city that now howled for her blood. Lamballe's grace had once been admired. Now it was ammunition. Her soft voice, once praised in Versailles, was mocked in broadsheets as the hiss of a serpent. They said she whispered poison into the queen's ear, that she twisted the monarch's will, corrupted her, seduced her, that she, more than any man, had driven France into famine with powdered wigs and perfumed treason. The truth was far less theatrical. She had stood beside the queen when no one else would. The crowds outside grew louder each day, chants for liberty melting into curses for royalty. Markets sold bread in blood-streaked coin. Men with red cockades spat on priests and kissed their guillotines like holy relics. And yet inside the palace, Lamballe remained calm. She wrote letters. She read poems. She stroked Marie's trembling hands and told her the storm would pass. But storms don't pass. They consume. When the Tuileries fell, when the mob broke through the gates like a tidal wave of rage, Lamballe was captured, her name scribbled hastily on a list, not for what she had done, but for who she stood beside. They dragged her from the palace, tore her away from the queen's arms. Marie begged, wept, promised that Lamballe was innocent, but innocence had long since been drowned in the Seine. They locked her in La Force prison, deep in the belly of Paris, stone walls, rats in the straw, women sobbing behind iron bars. Lamballe, once robed in velvet, now wrapped in lice and dust, waited. She believed she might be spared. Her family begged the National Assembly. Her husband's name still carried some weight, some hope. Even the guards seemed hesitant. She wasn't a criminal. She was just too close. But the revolution didn't want criminals. It wanted symbols. And Lamballe's face, porcelain skin, golden hair, lips still speaking the queen's name, had become the perfect one. The morning came like a blade. The sun rose red through the prison slats, and the sound of boots and shouting echoed down the corridor. The September massacres had begun. Mobs moved from cell to cell, dragging prisoners into the yard, where makeshift tribunals shouted questions and swung swords in answer. Lamballe was brought forward, her gown torn, face swollen from sleep and fear. She didn't plead. She stood straight. Her voice cracked only once, when they asked her loyalty. To the queen, she said. It was all they needed. There was no sentence read, no verdict declared, only a silence that trembled in the air, and then the sound of a blade unsheathing. The guards stepped back, and one leaned close to her ear. You'll want to pray now. She didn't scream. Not yet. That would come later. They didn't give her time to think. As soon as the guard whispered his final warning, you'll want to pray now, the mob surged forward like a tidal wave of limbs and howling mouths. There was no judge, no jury, no law, just the stench of sweat, piss and blood, and a dozen hands clawing at her body. Marie-Thérèse de Lamballe, Princess of Savoy-Carignan, superintendent of the Queen's household, was dragged screaming into the light of a Paris that had forgotten everything except how to hate. The prison gates flung open, not by soldiers but by revolutionaries who now fancied themselves the new clergy, their doctrine written in vengeance and wine. She was shoved into a courtyard slick with blood. A dozen corpses lay in various states of ruin, men and women who had once walked with powdered grace through Versailles, now torn open like animals in a slaughterhouse, heads bashed in, guts steaming in the dirt. One of them still twitched, mouth working silently, eyes rolling toward the woman now brought to kneel beside him. They called it a trial, but it was theater, the kind where the ending is known before the curtain ever rises. They asked only one question: are you loyal to the Queen? Lamballe didn't hesitate. Her voice was soft, cracked, barely more than breath. I am. The crowd exploded. The word alone, Queen, was a match tossed into dry hay. A man rushed forward, fist raised, and struck her across the jaw. Her lips split. Another grabbed her hair, ripping it free from its combs, golden curls tumbling in clumps. She tried to stand, but they knocked her back down. Someone shouted, "Strip her," and her gown was torn at the seams, lace snapped, silk shredded. The woman who once dined with monarchs now lay in the filth, her corset yanked from her ribs, her breast exposed to the sky, and still she did not beg. They stomped on her, kicked her, boots slammed into her side, her spine, her legs twisted beneath her, and a sickening crack silenced even some of the more bloodthirsty. One man stumbled back, suddenly queasy, but another took his place. They spat on her, urinated beside her, shoved her face into the dirt and said, "Kiss the soil your queen won't save you from." She tried to crawl. Her fingers clawed through mud and hair and bits of bone. She called out only once, "Marie," but there was no answer, only laughter, screams, and the sound of someone sharpening a blade on the stone. A butcher's knife, chipped, rusted, still wet with someone else's death, was raised above her. It wasn't the fatal blow, it was the invitation. The knife came down, not into her chest, but into her thigh. She howled, her body arched, then another blow, into her shoulder, slicing skin and fabric alike. Someone else grabbed her arm and bit into it, like an animal. She screamed again, and the crowd screamed with her, not in horror but in ecstasy. Blood sprayed across bare chests, across the faces of boys no older than 16, and still she lived. The death, when it came, did not come quickly. They cut her apart like a ritual. A knee, a wrist, one eye gouged, her scalp peeled back. Her screams grew hoarse, then silent, until the voice was gone and only the body remained, twitching, twitching, twitching. And when the twitching stopped, they still weren't finished. A man, tall, reeking of wine and shit, lifted her head by the hair. Blood sluiced down his arms. Her eyes were half closed, lips parted, teeth pink with her own blood. He took her face to a trough, dipped it, washed it. Others brought rouge, powder. One curled her hair again, mockingly, lovingly, as if preparing her for court. Then they set her head on a pike, and the crowd applauded. This wasn't just rage, it was performance, and the curtain had only just risen. She should have been buried, wrapped in linen, prayed over by candlelight, placed into the soil with dignity. But Marie-Thérèse de Lamballe's death wasn't meant to end. Her corpse, now robbed of voice, of self, was about to become something more, a message carved in flesh. The revolution didn't just want her silenced, it wanted her remembered, and so they made her into a banner. Her severed head was washed in a horse trough. Her golden hair, matted with blood, was gently combed, then curled, the iron still hot from the last blacksmith's fire. Rouge was smeared onto her cheeks, sloppy and theatrical. Blood was painted across her lips like lipstick. Someone tied a ribbon around her neck, mockingly elegant. Another kissed her on the forehead and whispered, "Now, ma belle, you're ready for your queen." And with that they impaled her. The pike slid through her neck with a wet crunch. Her eyes fluttered open briefly, or so the onlookers claimed, though perhaps that was just the imagination of a city already drunk on death. They hoisted her high. The crowd roared. The procession began. A mob of hundreds surged through the streets of Paris, carrying Lamballe's head like a sacred relic. They chanted no prayers, only insults. Her name was twisted into curses. Children pointed. Drunken men danced beside the blood-dripping pike. At every street corner they stopped to show the trophy, to shopkeepers, to beggars, to whores in alleyways. One man knelt before it and toasted with wine. Another claimed he saw the mouth twitch. No one corrected him. The march reached the markets, still full despite the hunger. Meatless stalls and rotting produce sat under the shadow of the severed head. Vendors didn't flinch. They knew better than to show fear. Some bowed mockingly. Others turned away, silent. But no one stopped it. She passed the churches. Priests closed their doors. They prayed behind locked sanctuaries, pretending the sound of hooves and screams was just thunder. The pike kept moving. At last the procession reached the palace. Marie Antoinette was inside. The queen, already a prisoner, already a widow in waiting, was reading scripture when the screams rose beneath her window. Shouting, applause, singing. A woman fainted in the courtyard, clutching a rosary that shattered on the stone. From the upper floor, a servant rushed in and whispered something to the queen. They brought her. Marie stood, walked slowly to the balcony, heart pounding. The wind was heavy with rot and candle smoke. She stepped into the light, and there it was, Lamballe's head, eyes dull, lips stiff, hair arranged just as Marie had once done it herself on quiet afternoons in Versailles. They'd curled it in defiance, the same way the queen had loved it. A ribbon she once gave as a gift still hung from one bloody lock. The pike was thrust upward toward her. Marie didn't scream. She didn't faint, not right away. Some say she whispered her name, Thérèse. Others claim she went silent for hours after, unable to speak, that her hands trembled so violently she dropped her prayer book, that she never recovered, that she never slept soundly again. That night, the head disappeared. The mob, having fulfilled its spectacle, dispersed. Some claimed they burned the remains. Others said it was stolen by a royalist sympathizer who buried it beneath a chapel floor. A few whispered something darker, that it was kept, preserved, hidden, passed down. A trophy not of war, but of warning. Lamballe had become what they wanted, not just a corpse, but a weapon. Her death didn't end at the pike. It walked through the streets, it climbed palace walls, it lived in the dreams of a queen already unraveling. And in every portrait Marie Antoinette posed for afterward, pale, rigid, unsmiling, you can almost see it behind her eyes. Not fear, not guilt, but mourning. The kind you don't speak of, the kind that never leaves. The official documents said little. Executed by popular will, they wrote. Killed by the crowd during the September massacres. No mention of the mock trial. No mention of what they did to her body after she stopped screaming. Not a word about how long it took her to die. History, when it's uncomfortable, edits with a scalpel. And Marie-Thérèse de Lamballe's final moments were carved out, not because they were forgotten, but because they were too horrifying to remember. But Paris remembered. Not the city in books, the real one. The one that bled in alleys and whispered behind closed shutters. Underground pamphlets passed from trembling hands spoke of her death in hushed, fevered detail. They wrote of how she was raped after death, or just before, depending on the account. How her entrails were pulled from her body and worn around the neck of a butcher like jewelry. They wrote of a man who sliced off her breast and nailed it to the prison gate. Of a child made to touch her severed hand for luck. It wasn't just killing. It was desecration. It was madness. They called it justice. But justice doesn't wear a woman's scalp as a wig. Inside the palace, Marie Antoinette sat in silence for days. They brought her tea. She didn't drink it. They offered mass. She refused. She clutched her children but barely spoke to them. Guards said she walked in circles at night, tracing the edges of her cell as if trying to find something that had vanished. A hand that once held hers. A voice that once calmed her trembling. Her friend was gone, and the message was clear. This wasn't a warning. This was a sentence. No one was punished. The men who mutilated Lamballe returned to the streets like heroes. One became a tavern owner. His establishment proudly hung a blood-stained apron above the door. Another disappeared into the National Guard, protected by those who knew the value of keeping silence. But not all of them slept well. Years later, in different corners of France, some of those men began to confess. On deathbeds, in drunk whispers, in letters that were burned before they were finished. One said she haunted his dreams, not the Lamballe he had killed, but the one he remembered from court. Kind, soft-voiced, the woman who once handed him bread as a boy outside Versailles. Another claimed he heard her scream in his sleep for 30 years. Always the same word, Marie. Revolution, they said, devours its own, and so it did. Some of the mob leaders who had led her execution met the same end. The guillotine made no distinction between the righteous and the monstrous. It only knew the weight of heads, and Lamballe's death, though meant to terrify the royals, slowly began to terrify those who celebrated it. Because there was no honor in it, no glory, only rot, only blood. In the years after the revolution, her name became a ghost. She was not celebrated as a martyr, nor remembered as a villain. She was erased, too inconvenient for royalists, too horrifying for Republicans. Statues of her were quietly removed, portraits taken down. The Queen never spoke of her again, not publicly, but in the final letter Marie Antoinette wrote before her own execution. She left a note for her sister-in-law. "I have no friends left, save one, and she waits for me beyond the veil." Decades later, during renovations at a former revolutionary tavern, workers unearthed a hidden chamber beneath the floorboards. Dust-choked, forgotten, a hole where wine and secrets had once flowed. Inside, they found a collection of bones, animal mostly, but one skull stood out, small, feminine, fractured, blonde curls still clinging to it, almost fused into the bone. Around the base of the skull, lodged in the old dirt, was a single rotted pearl earring. No one claimed it. No records were filed. The skull vanished before the museums could even confirm its origin. But those who saw it said the mouth was slightly open, as if frozen mid-scream. Marie-Thérèse de Lamballe was no tyrant, no politician, no traitor. She wasn't hated for anything she did, only for the person she loved. In the boiling storm of revolution, she stood beside the Queen when most fled. She didn't plot, she didn't poison, she simply stayed, and for that, they tore her apart. Her death wasn't justice, It was theater, a savage pageant for a crowd hungry not just for change, but for blood that meant something. The mob didn't kill her because she was dangerous. They killed her because her face reminded them of Versailles, because her perfume smelled like privilege, because her voice was soft when the world had turned hard. She became the canvas for their hate. But even in death, they couldn't silence her completely. Her mutilation echoed louder than any royal decree. Her parade through the streets was a funeral no one could forget. Not the queen, not the crowd, not history, even if it tried. In the end, she died for love, not of a nation, not of power, but of a friend. And what they did to her was born not from revolution, but from hate, wearing liberty's mask. And the scream they forced from her lips, it still lingers, in silence, in shame, in the places history chose to forget.